Emily Carter is my name. At 28 years old, I stood just months ago on the University of Washington's graduation platform, accepting my MBA degree while friends and colleagues applauded. This moment should have marked one of life's greatest celebrations, a pinnacle I dedicated nearly 10 years of work and education to reach. Yet, like every significant achievement before it, this occasion lacked something crucial, or more precisely, lacked the individuals I should have been able to consider my family. From childhood, I recognized my position within our household. I became the accommodating one, the person who would make sacrifices for harmony, the daughter perpetually measured against Ashley. Ashley, my junior by 3 years and the treasured child in our parents' perception. Richard and Linda Carter, my mother and father, reside in a tranquil Oregon coastal community, the type of place where residents know each other and rumors can spread through every coffee shop within hours. To outsiders, we appeared to be the ideal family unit. My father operated an established hardware business. My mother held a position at the municipal library, and Ashley and I matured in a 2-level wooden home adorned with hanging flower baskets and holiday lights that remained illuminated well into February. However, what neighbors never witnessed was the glaring disparity in how my parents treated Ashley versus me. Ashley represented the long-desired child, treasured and sheltered as though the world might damage her at any instant. When Ashley expressed interest in dance instruction, my parents immediately secured a private teacher. When she mentioned wanting to visit Europe for personal enrichment, they purchased airline tickets without hesitation. Meanwhile, I learned that money required effort to earn, that independence was necessary to value things properly, and that parental support couldn't always be expected. Therefore, starting at 16, I took evening jobs at a roadside restaurant, accumulating every dollar for textbooks and college expenses, while Ashley never questioned where her next meal originated. I once believed this represented different parenting approaches, that my parents were building my strength. Eventually, I realized this favoritism wasn't some grand child-rearing philosophy. It was a decision, and it was never made in my favor. I still recall my undergraduate commencement ceremony. My parents arrived nearly 60 minutes late because Ashley needed a shopping trip for her performance outfit. When I received my initial degree, they captured a few hasty photographs and departed before the event concluded. The day I informed them about my MBA program acceptance at the University of Washington, my father merely nodded and stated, "Fine, but don't anticipate our financial assistance." So I did precisely what they instructed. I managed everything independently. I pursued scholarships, maintained part-time employment, accepted additional marketing consulting assignments for small companies, and spent 2 complete years balancing full academic loads with over 40 weekly work hours. On graduation day, I expected their absence. As predicted, the family seating remained vacant. However, immediately following the ceremony, while photographing with friends on the lawn before the main structure, I received an unexpected call from my maternal grandparents' lawyer. Mr. Samuel Pierce's deep, steady voice came through the phone. "Emily, your grandparents bequeathed their complete estate to you. We must arrange a meeting to review the specifics." I froze, not due to the money, since I remained unaware of the amount, but because I had never realized my grandparents held such trust and affection for me. My maternal grandparents, Harold and Margaret Lewis, had nurtured my finest qualities. Their aged seaside residence with red brick exterior walls, a wide porch facing the ocean, and a rose garden that flourished magnificently each summer served as my refuge whenever I felt lost. They lived modestly yet thoughtfully, dedicating most days to reading, gardening, and sharing stories of their youth in 1952, when this town remained a small fishing community. During high school, I spent nearly every weekend there, assisting my grandfather with fence repairs, preparing apple pies with my grandmother, and most importantly, listening. This was something I rarely experienced in my own home. In their declining years, as their health deteriorated, I became the one driving them to medical appointments, managing their finances, paying their bills, and attending to every minor need. My parents and Ashley rarely appeared except for Thanksgiving or Christmas. Even then, they usually came only to capture a few social media photographs. So when Mr. Samuel informed me they had left everything to me, I understood it wasn't random or preferential treatment. It was acknowledgement. Several days later, sitting in Mr. Samuel's warm wood-paneled office in the town center, he placed a thick folder before me and said, "Your grandparents' current estate value is approximately $1 million, including the old house and their financial investments. They want you to have complete control." I sat silently, experiencing mixed emotions: gratitude, deep affection, and a hint of apprehension. When I left his office that day, I drove along the coastal road back to Seattle, the ocean's salty breeze surrounding my thoughts. $1 million sounded like a fairy tale. Yet I knew the real value wasn't just the money or property. It was the years of memories, the sunlit mornings on that red brick porch, the aroma of my grandmother's coffee, and my grandfather's laughter as he read the morning newspaper. And because I understood this, I also knew this wouldn't remain a fairy tale for long. In my family, anything valuable immediately became a target. My parents had an extensive history of borrowing possessions or money from others with promises to return them, only to vanish along with the item and the promise. I still remember when I was a college freshman, my aunt gave them a substantial sum to invest in my father's store. 6 months later, the store remained unchanged. The money had disappeared. Whenever my aunt inquired about it, my mother would skillfully redirect the conversation or criticize her for making such a big issue about family money. With Ashley, things differed. My parents never needed to borrow from her because they had already decided everything belonged to her from the beginning. From her first vehicle to her European trip to the small Portland apartment they purchased as an investment but ultimately let her occupy rent-free, everything happened without anyone else's input. That's why the moment I signed the inheritance paperwork from Mr. Samuel, I knew I had to act first. I couldn't wait until they discovered it and then try to protect it. By then it would be too late. I contacted an old law school friend who now worked at a major real estate law firm in Seattle. She introduced me to an attorney named Daniel Hart, a man in his 40s who spoke quietly but whose eyes missed nothing. We met at a small cafe near Capitol Hill where he spread my file across the table, reviewed each page, and nodded. "Emily, I've handled many inheritance disputes, and honestly, if your family history is what you've just described, you need to secure these assets immediately. The best method is placing everything into an irrevocable trust," he said, his tone calm but firm. He explained the irrevocable trust structure, a type of trust that once established cannot be unilaterally altered or revoked by the original owner, with assets completely separated from personal property. I would serve as the trustee, the only person with authority to manage and make decisions regarding the trust. But legally, the assets would no longer be in my name. That meant anyone checking public records would find no connection between me and the house or the investments. I agreed immediately, and over the next 3 weeks we worked continuously. Daniel coordinated with an asset management company to establish an LLC owned by the trust, and all utility accounts for the house, electricity, water, taxes, insurance, were transferred to the company's name. The property title was updated, stamped, and stored in the law firm's safe, with copies kept at a Seattle bank, far from the coastal town where my parents might accidentally gain access. The bank accounts my grandparents had left were closed, and all funds were moved into a new account belonging to the trust, secured with two-factor authentication, accessible only to me and Daniel. I remember vividly the moment I signed the final document, placing my pen under the words, "Irrevocable Living Trust Agreement." It was a mixture of relief and vigilance, like securing the last door between myself and the hands that had taken so much from me before. I told no one, not even close friends. When my parents called asking, "When are you moving into your grandparents' house?" in a tone that was half concern, half probing, I simply smiled and said I was still busy in Seattle. When Ashley texted, "Have you thought about selling the house and splitting the money? I need capital to open a nail salon with my friend," I replied with a single word: "No." I let them believe I hadn't done anything, that everything remained untouched, so they would stay complacent and continue underestimating me, just as they always had. In the weeks that followed, I continued working as usual, still driving back to town on weekends to check on the house, mow the lawn, and water the roses my grandmother once tended. Every time I stepped inside that house, I felt peace, but there was always a quiet warning echoing in my mind. They will come sooner or later. And because of that, I held my secret even tighter. I instructed Daniel to ensure that no one but me would receive any notifications or correspondence related to the trust. All bills were paid online, leaving no paper trail in the house. I even installed a discreet security camera system hidden from plain sight just to make sure that if anyone decided to drop by unexpectedly, I would know immediately. Once everything was in order, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. I had built a solid legal wall around my grandparents' assets, a wall my parents and Ashley couldn't tear down with a few forged documents or a tearful story. But I also knew that for them, that wall would only make them want to climb higher, dig deeper. And when that day came, I would be ready. In the first few months after everything had been fully transferred into the trust, things were unusually quiet. No urgent phone calls, no long-winded text messages filled with exclamation marks, no surprise appearances by my parents at my grandparents' house with the excuse of just passing by. But that silence didn't give me peace. On the contrary, it felt like a still lake where I knew for certain there were undercurrents moving beneath the surface. Occasionally, in our brief phone calls, my mother would say things that sounded casual but carried a heavy undertone. It would only be fair if your grandparents left the house to both you and your sister. Or Ashley has so many memories there too. You should think about sharing so she doesn't feel excluded. I would just smile faintly, give a non-committal neither confirming nor denying, letting them interpret my silence however they wanted. Ashley was more subtle. She began dropping by for the most ordinary reasons, bringing me some cookies Mom had just baked, delivering a few items. Mom said she left at Grandma and Grandpa's, or sometimes simply stopping in because she was passing through on the way back from Portland. But each time Ashley's eyes were never really on my face. They drifted over the bookshelves, the wall where my grandparents' photo hung, and especially the wooden cabinet where I kept unimportant papers. At least unimportant to me, but potentially very interesting to someone looking for proof of ownership. I never let her stay alone in the living room. And whenever Ashley would casually ask, "Do you still have the house papers? I just want to look at them for fun," I would smile and steer the conversation elsewhere as if I hadn't heard the question. My parents also started behaving differently. After years of near neglect, they suddenly seemed far more interested in me. One Friday evening, I received an invitation to come home for dinner with Mom, adding pointedly, "We need to have a family talk. Nothing's more important than this." When I arrived, the meal was far more elaborate than usual. Roast meat, wine, freshly baked apple pie. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around phrases like managing the inheritance together, preserving the memories your grandparents left, and making sure everyone benefits fairly. They never said it outright, but every word was meant to remind me that in their eyes, my grandparents' house and assets were not mine alone. They were family property. I nodded, smiled occasionally, neither rejecting nor agreeing, letting them believe I had made no legal preparations, that I was still the obedient daughter who could be persuaded. Other times, my father would call with an unusually cheerful tone, asking if I needed anyone to help maintain the house, saying he knew some workers who could repair the roof, repaint the porch, or check the wiring for safety. I knew it was just an excuse to get people inside, and I would always decline politely, saying I was learning more about property management and wanted to handle it myself. He would pause for a few seconds, then change his tone, half joking, half serious. "Just afraid you won't be able to hold on to it, and then you'll have to call us in." I would simply respond with a light laugh, never taking the bait. During that time, I also started watching them more closely. I noticed Ashley began posting vague social media updates about fairness and sharing within the family, sometimes accompanied by photos of my grandparents' house taken from a distance, clearly from her drop-by visits. My parents, meanwhile, started reconnecting with relatives they rarely spoke to, as if building a quiet network of support. I heard from an aunt that my mother had been telling people, "Emily's young, so she needs guidance to make sure she doesn't waste what her grandparents left." All of it came together into a clear picture. They were preparing for a big move, but they weren't ready to strike just yet. I kept my routine unchanged, Still visiting my grandparents' house every weekend to tend the garden and clean inside. Still working steadily in Seattle. But in my mind, I knew this was only the calm before the storm. They needed time to find a legal angle, or at least a convincing story that could win sympathy from others. And I needed this same time to watch, to memorize every look, every offhand remark, every subtle gesture that might be a fragment of a larger plan. My silence wasn't passivity. It was strategy. I let them feel confident that I wasn't on guard, that I was still the same Emily from years ago. The girl too buried in her studies to think about protecting her own interests. Because when they believed the prey was standing still, they would draw closer. And that was exactly when I wanted them in my sights. That morning, the coastal town lay under a thin veil of clouds with weak sunlight spilling over the front yard, glinting off scattered red and gold maple leaves along the stone walkway. I wore a gray sweater, broom in hand, leisurely sweeping the leaves into a corner, listening to the distant crash of waves. The salty tang of the morning breeze, the cries of seagulls woven into the rustle of leaves, made the moment feel unusually peaceful, until the hum of an engine broke it apart. A familiar black SUV turned into the driveway, its tires crunching over the gravel. I recognized it immediately. It was my parents' car. Before I could even wonder why they were here, the passenger door swung open and Ashley stepped out, her golden hair tied neatly back, her face glowing as if she'd just achieved something monumental. My mother followed, carrying a slim folder in her hands while my father climbed slowly out of the driver's seat, wearing that smile I knew too well, the one he used right before making some important announcement. Ashley broke the silence first. "Hey sis," she said brightly, striding toward me as though we were about to share some wonderful news. "This house is in my name now. Mom and Dad want you to move out this week so I can renovate and sell it. I already have a potential buyer." The words spilled out in one breath without a single pause, as if everything had been decided long ago, and I was merely being informed. I tightened my grip on the broom handle, feeling the damp, cool wood against my palms, but kept my face calm. My father stepped forward, holding out a set of papers stamped with something in blue ink, pushing them toward me as he spoke. "We've been working with a lawyer. Turns out in your grandparents' will, there was a section that wasn't updated after Grandma passed. Technically, the house should belong to both you and your sister, but your grandfather accidentally left that part out. We fixed that error and transferred ownership to Ashley, so it's easier to manage. You already have a place to live, don't you? This is the most reasonable solution." My mother stood beside him, nodding in agreement, her eyes carrying that look of, "This is for everyone's benefit." I looked at the stack of papers, noting the pages printed from an unofficial source, the seal that looked suspiciously fake, the shaky signatures, and above all the way they presented it to me with such confidence, as if I would obediently nod and agree. Inside, I almost wanted to laugh, but outwardly, I only tilted my head slightly and let a thin smile curl across my lips. "Really?" My question came slowly, carrying no trace of surprise. More like an idle comment on the information I'd just been given. Ashley blinked, seemingly unsure why I was so calm. "Yes, really. You don't have to worry. I'll make sure everything is handled quickly. I think you can have all your things moved out within a week. I'll hire people to clear the place for renovation. Everything will go smoothly." Her voice held a hint of excitement, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. My father cut in, lowering his voice as though to soothe me. "Emily, you know, this house needs constant upkeep, and Ashley has both the time and a clear plan. You're busy with work in Seattle. Holding on to this place will only be a burden. This is the best way for everyone," my mother added. "Besides, Ashley will share a portion of the sale with you, won't you, Ashley?" Ashley nodded rapidly, though her eyes flashed with the certainty of victory. I said nothing more. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, giving them the confidence that I was actually considering their offer, when in reality, I had anticipated this exact scene months ago. I knew every step they would take. Knew they would show up with a story half true, half invented. Knew they would present documents they thought would be enough to push me out of this house. And I also knew that today was not the day to expose everything. Instead of arguing, I leaned the broom against the porch wall, wiped my hands on my jeans, and spoke in an even tone. "I've heard you." I didn't call them mom, dad, or sister in my reply. And that made Ashley's brow crease slightly, though she kept smiling. "Good. Then we'll be back soon to get started. I'll call the moving company today," she said with a note of relief. My father folded the papers, slipping them back into his jacket pocket as if the matter were already settled. They left after a few awkward pleasantries, the SUV rolling down the drive and disappearing around the bend, leaving a faint trace of exhaust mingling with the salt in the air. I stood there for a long moment, watching until the car was gone, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Not because I was accepting defeat, far from it, but because I knew the real game was only just beginning. They still thought I was the compliant daughter of years past, the one who would set aside her own rights to keep the peace in the family. But this time they were completely wrong. Inside the house, I poured myself a cup of tea, settled into the armchair by the window, and opened my laptop. I sent Daniel a short message. They came exactly as expected. Prepare for the next step. 2 days after their so-called confident announcement, the morning in the coastal town began under a thin veil of mist mixed with the scent of the sea. I had risen early, not to clean or make breakfast, but to prepare for the moment I knew would come. The table in the living room was cleared, holding only the thick blue-bound files stamped with the name of the trust, its pages neatly organized and tabbed. Outside on the wooden porch, I had placed an extra chair for my guest, Mr. Mark Harris, a representative from the County Office of Property Records. As the clock neared 10, the rumble of a truck engine sounded from the end of the gravel road, each rotation of the tires like a countdown. A white moving truck rolled forward, led by the familiar black SUV belonging to my parents. Ashley jumped out first from the passenger seat, dressed in a designer tracksuit, hair tied high, phone in hand, as if ready to record her moment of triumph. My father stepped out from behind the wheel, his smile half reassurance, half assertion of control. My mother followed briskly, pointing toward the porch and signaling the two movers to start unloading the dollies from the truck. Their footsteps crunched over the gravel, laughter mingling with the sound, utterly convinced the matter was settled. But as they set foot on the walkway, the sight before them made them freeze. I stood there, arms folded across my chest beside Mr. Mark Harris in a neatly tailored navy suit and striped tie, his silver-streaked hair combed smoothly back. In his hands was a thick file, the cover clearly bearing the trust's name, clipped with several documents bearing bold red seals. He didn't speak immediately, waiting until they had stepped a few paces closer. When the distance narrowed to just a few meters, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his official ID, holding it up just enough for them to see. "Am I speaking with Mr. Richard Carter, Mrs. Linda Carter, and Miss Ashley Carter?" His voice was clear, deep, and deliberate. The three of them exchanged glances, a flicker of confusion at his opening question. My father nodded, forcing a steady tone. "Yes, what is this about?" Mark glanced down at the file, then spoke. "I'm here on behalf of the County Office of Property Records to inform you of the legal status of this property. According to our records, this house was placed into an irrevocable trust as of the 12th of April last year, with Miss Emily Carter as the sole trustee. That means any transfer of ownership attempted after that date, including through the documents currently in your possession, is legally void and, in this case, constitutes fraud." The statement dropped like a heavy stone. Ashley's smile vanished first, replaced by a rapid blink, as if scrambling for a defense. My mother's grip on the papers tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line, while my father stepped forward half a pace, his voice sharp. "Fraud? What fraud? We just corrected an error in the will. Your grandparents forgot." Mr. Mark cut in politely but firmly. "Sir, any correction or amendment made without legal authorization from the trustee, and without going through the county's formal process is null and void. Furthermore, our records from Miss Emily show that you used an out-of-state service to produce the transfer documents, along with a notary seal that is not licensed in Oregon. These factors are sufficient to trigger a criminal investigation if necessary. I stayed silent, watching their reactions. The two movers, who had been standing at the edge of the porch, exchanged uneasy glances. One coughed lightly, then slowly stepped back toward the truck. Ashley swallowed hard, trying to regain her voice. "What are you doing, Emily? We're family." I turned to meet her gaze directly, my voice dropping low. "Family doesn't bring forged documents to throw me out of the house my grandparents trusted me to protect. Family doesn't hire people to clear out my belongings without my consent." Mr. Mark picked up where I left off. His voice still steady, but each word weighted. "I will file an official report of today's events along with a formal warning. If you return here with any further intent to take possession, we will proceed to the next step, including contacting the police and the district attorney's office to open a case." He handed my father a copy of the notice, then turned to me. "Miss Carter, all management and control rights to this property remain entirely with the trust under your authority." My parents and Ashley lingered for a few seconds longer, as if hoping I might change my mind. When they saw nothing but my calm, steady gaze, my father spun on his heel. His voice clipped. "Let's go." Ashley shot me a glare, spitting out, "You'll regret this." I answered only with the faintest smile, a smile sharp enough to unsettle them more than any words could. The movers had nearly jogged back to the truck by then, packing up their gear far faster than they had unloaded it. When the SUV and moving truck rolled away, leaving the gravel drive quiet again, I exhaled slowly. Mr. Mark closed the file, handed me a copy, and said, "They'll try again, but today you showed them it won't be easy." I nodded in thanks, walked him to his car, then stood on the porch looking out at the ocean. The waves kept their steady rhythm, as if no one had tried to disturb the peace of this house. But I knew this was only the opening round, and I'd have to be ready for whatever came next. 3 days after the confrontation on the porch with Mr. Mark Harris as witness, I returned to Seattle and tried to focus on my usual work. But that Wednesday afternoon, as I stepped into my apartment, I saw a yellow envelope placed neatly at the door. The corner bore the name of a law firm in Portland, and the neatly typed line, "To Emily Carter," told me exactly what I was about to read. Inside was a 4-page letter printed on heavy paper in a formal serif font, titled "Formal Demand for Settlement." The sender was my mother's attorney. I sat down at the kitchen table and read every line. In the opening paragraph, they claimed my mother was acting on behalf of the family's interests and accused me of violating my moral and emotional obligations by not sharing my grandparents' estate. Then came the list of demands: $150,000 in cash as emotional distress compensation for my mother, joint ownership of the seaside house with Ashley, and a monthly stipend until further notice to ensure the family's long-term well-being. The reason they gave was that my keeping the entire estate had caused severe emotional strain and damaged the mother-daughter and sisterly bonds. By the time I finished reading, I felt equal parts amused and exhausted. Instead of reacting impulsively, I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and found the name of the one person I knew could help me handle this. Sonia Patel, an estate and trust attorney Daniel had introduced to me when I was finalizing my grandparents' asset transfer. Sonia was in her early 40s, petite, soft-spoken, but with every word as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. I scheduled a meeting for the next morning at her downtown Seattle office, bringing both the letter and a copy of the trust documents. The moment I sat down across from her, Sonia opened the letter, skimmed through it, then looked up at me with a faint, tilted smile. "Emily, they're playing legal intimidation games and they think you'll panic." When I asked what she wanted to do first, her answer came immediately. "We're going to send them a cease and desist, demanding they stop all harassment, making it clear their claims have no legal basis, and then we're going to investigate in the other direction." Within 2 days, Sonia had the letter drafted. Her tone in it was both polite and formidable, affirming the absolute legality of the irrevocable trust, stating that neither my mother nor Ashley had any legal claim, and warning that any further attempts to threaten or harass would result in legal action against them. The letter was sent via certified mail to both my mother's attorney and her home address in Oregon. But Sonia didn't stop there. Using Mr. Mark's file and the information I provided, Sonia traced the documents they had brought during the moving truck incident. She checked the notary stamp number and discovered it didn't exist in Oregon's notary database. Then, by reviewing the transaction registration code, she found the filing had been made through an out-of-state online property record service, one that several states had already flagged as a hub for forged filings designed to bypass local verification. And the name listed as the filer, Ashley Carter. When Sonia said it aloud, I felt both relief and a cold, sharp anger run down my spine. Relief because we now had irrefutable proof this wasn't just a family misunderstanding, but a deliberate act of fraud. Anger because my own sister, the girl who once stood next to me on the same high school graduation stage, had willingly signed her name on a forged document to steal our grandparents' home. Sonia's voice hardened. With this evidence, if they keep pushing, we'll hand it over to the fraud division of the district attorney's office. You won't need to say much. These documents will speak for themselves. I left Sonia's office that day with a copy of the preliminary investigative report, the cease and desist letter already sent, and a feeling completely different from when I'd first opened that yellow envelope at my door. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was only defending myself. I had started pushing back. I knew this wouldn't be the final move, but it was a solid one. And I also knew that on their side, they wouldn't retreat quietly. Only a week after Sonia sent the cease and desist, I began noticing a strange shift in how certain relatives spoke to me. An aunt in California suddenly texted to ask if I was doing okay and whether things were really as Linda said. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years called me, his voice meandering, bringing up awkward situations and hoping we can still keep family ties. I didn't need long to figure it out. This was the start of a new offensive, this time not aimed at my assets but at me. 2 days later, my suspicion was confirmed when my phone buzzed with a message from Megan, my maternal cousin, the one I had always considered the most straightforward person in the family. Emily, I need to see you right away. Aunt Linda has been saying a lot about you to the whole family. It's not good. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Olympia, each of us driving in from opposite directions. Megan arrived early, already seated in a secluded corner with her laptop open and a stack of sticky notes beside it. As soon as I sat down, she pulled the laptop toward herself and pressed play on a recording. My mother's voice came through clearly, tinged with a kind of feigned weariness. I don't want to speak ill of her, but Emily. She took advantage of my father's weakness to convince him to change the will. At that time, he wasn't of sound mind. Everyone knows that. I even suspect she manipulated the legal process in ways he didn't fully understand. Megan paused, looking me straight in the eye. You know, she's not just saying this to one person. This is one of 12 voice messages I've gotten this past week. She's even created a group chat with several other cousins to tell and retell this story. I sat in silence, a wave of heat and cold running down my spine. Hearing my mother's voice, I realized she had escalated the narrative from a property dispute to moral, and even criminal accusations. That wasn't just about damaging my reputation with family. It could impact my career in Seattle, where trust and credibility are everything. Megan pulled out her phone and scrolled through a string of messages from the group chat. Lines like, Emily's always been selfish. Grandma and Grandpa would have wanted it split evenly. She's just good at taking advantage of situations. A few people had even embellished the story, suggesting I had tricked my grandfather into signing papers he hadn't read carefully. I lifted my head and asked Megan, "Do you believe any of this?" She shook her head immediately. "No, I know who you are. But you have to understand, if she keeps saying it over and over, the relatives who don't see you often will start to believe it. And you know, in this family, once they've bought into a story, it's nearly impossible to reverse it." Her words rang like a warning bell. Driving back, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. This was no longer about them wanting the house or $150,000. This was an attempt to destroy my image, to turn me into the greedy granddaughter who betrayed her own grandparents. If I let it go, the rumor would spread, and soon everything I said would be questioned. The social pressure, the scolding phone calls from relatives, and the advice to just compromise for the sake of peace would push me into a corner. I'd seen my mother do this to others in the family when I was younger, and I knew once she set her sights on someone, she wouldn't stop until that person was isolated. That night, I called Sonia and recounted everything Megan had shown and played for me. Sonia was silent for a long moment before saying, "Emily, this is a reputational attack. We're no longer just defending your assets. We have to protect your credibility too. The good news is you have direct evidence from Megan. Messages, recordings, the group chat. That's gold in front of any legal authority, or if we need to prove malicious intent." I agreed instantly. We decided that from now on, every piece of information, no matter how small, would be documented. Screenshots, audio files, names of those involved, exact dates and times. When I hung up the phone, it was close to midnight. Sitting alone in my apartment, I realized this was no longer a simple battle over property rights. This was a fight for the narrative, over who would be believed and who would be branded the traitor. And if I lost control of my own story, everything my grandparents had left behind, not just the house but their honor and the memory of them, would be twisted forever. From that moment on, I knew I would not let that happen. The next morning, I spent hours in Sonia's office, seated at a dark wooden table strewn with documents, an external hard drive, and a laptop already open to a working draft. Sunlight from the tall window caught the edges of the manila folders, making them look like cards waiting to be turned over. Sonia sat opposite me, her thin-framed glasses sliding down her nose, eyes fixed on the screen as she typed the first lines of the statement of facts. We started with the most clear and verifiable events: the dates of my grandparents' passing, the original contents of the will, the timeline for establishing the irrevocable trust, and the lawfully notarized transfer documents. From there, Sonia methodically listed the evidence of fraud: photographs of the fake notary seal, the state database entry confirming the registration number did not exist, and the filing records showing the property was submitted through and out.